coming, okay? Our students coming also to this session. Welcome on this RC26 on human rights of International Political Science Association webinar. Today we would like to celebrate a World Press Freedom Day. United Nations General Ensemble declared 3rd of May as World Press Freedom Day, also known as a World Press Day. Almost 30 years ago, in 1993, the main purpose of this global initiative is to raise awareness about the importance of press freedom and to remind governments of their obligation to respect and uphold the right to freedom of expression enshrined in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. In this way, the international community wishes to focus the world's attention on the fundamental problems of media freedom, the access press freedom around the world, to defend the media against attack on its independence, and to pay tribute to journalists who have lost their lives, sometimes even, in the exercise of their profession. The right to freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the media, access to the information, and the pursuit of peace and sustainable development are closely intertwined. Undoubtedly, without free and pluralistic media, there can be no proper democracy. Therefore, media freedom and freedom of expression are fundamental human rights. So this is the reason why RC26 on human rights celebrates this day. 3 days after the UNESCO and the United Nations, we would like to focus on this issue and to discuss some important problems from this area. Thanks once again to all speakers. It's great privilege and honor hosting you during this webinar. And so I think it will be a very interesting session and very fruitful discussion. So we have 7 distinguished guest speakers from 4 continents, from United States, Mexico, Brazil. I hope also Professor Leonard Vizos will join also to the session. From Portugal, from Poland, Czech Republic, and also from Pakistan. Thank you very much once again, Professor Shaista Tabassum, for joining this session. I know that there is a very late hours, so thank you very much for commitment to this session. Okay, first speaker will be Alexander Pires. Alexander has a double doctoral degree with a PhD in legal and social science, with postdoctoral studies in European constitutional justice and in human rights, and also a PhD in political science. In addition, he is a master of law, specialist in higher teaching, in contemporary philosophy, in civil law and procedure, and specialist in state and administrative law, in addition to degree in law. As a university professor, he has a long experience of more than 20 years teaching undergrad in Brazil and Portugal, specialization in Brazil and Portugal, masters, also in Portugal, but also in the United States of America, and doctoral courses in Portugal and Argentina. He has published more than 40 papers, in addition to participating in national and international events, having delivered more than 80 conferences and speeches, and organized numerous events from seminars to international congress in reference to the research group of which he is a member, which emphasizes one of the Center for Research and Development in Legal Science Retro Legis, former member of the board, member of scientific committee, coordinator of GI and researcher, and Center for Research and Development in Law and Society, member of scientific and collaborating committee in CADS. Alex, I'm sorry if I missed something, but the list of your success is very long, but now I would like to invite you to present the topic media freedom in the face of democratic values. Do you need access to the presentation? Do you have a presentation or not?
Yeah, see. Of course.
Oscar, it is possible to give the yeah, it is possible.
Yeah. He has to, you see the chat, the speakers, and then an arrow. You have to click the arrow, and then it share content, and then share the file or share the screen. You can share a file or share the screen. You see on the left.
Hi, Oscar. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I will decline to share the screen, so I will just talk, okay?
Okay.
Okay, let's go. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, JJ. It's mine. I'm very grateful for the honorable invitation to participate in this event and initiative of the RC26 on human rights from the International Political Science Association, and congratulate the entire working group on behalf of its chair, Professor JJ. I congratulate and thank you for the opportunity to meet and share the event with your other colleagues who are experts on the subject. I would like to start bringing your greetings from Portugal, both from the Autonomous University of Lisbon and the Warsaw Legal Science Research Center, and from the Justice and Governance Research Center at the University of Minho. Well, when we think about the phenomena that happen to us in society, at a local level, and especially at a global level, we can be sure of the need to discuss and reflect on the return principles in the face of the freedoms. It is important to say that these freedoms must be taught of in a rational and scientific way. In other words, from power to death, in the face of doing or failing to do. In other words, the personal deeds of each of us to rebuild the world through moral values. The perception is easily observed from the escalation of international tensions, of individuals' intolerance, marked by prejudice justified by false truths. We sometimes forget that we are culturally constructed human beings, which gives us the condition of being equal but different. Equal because we are human, and different because we want different things from each other, things that always seem the best to us. On the other hand, this perception becomes more relevant when we consider that the beginning of this century is very different from previous centuries, because it begins with a commitment to resolve the consequences of the technological revolution, in which information is considered both a precious commodity and a powerful weapon of control. After all, as they say, whoever controls information controls power. Nowadays, however, everyone can control information with greater or lesser complexity, which has two consequences in terms of comparison by opposition, one good and the other not so good. The good consequence is that everyone has access to information, while the opposite consequence is that not all information is qualified. In other words, there is an increase in the manipulation of discourse through fake news and malicious treatments of elements, to mention just a few but major phenomena. Since the manipulation of discourse is evident, we are no longer talking so much about access to information, but rather about the security of good and true information. We have therefore reached the elastic limits of philosophical reflection on a vast domain that expands from theory for the individual formation of the being through criticism in the search of rational knowledge that can be restricted for now to sapere to the complex network of control over the dissemination of information by traditional means or by digital instruments, but always on comparison by opposition, not between right and Dutch. This is the opportune moment to move on to freedom. No, not just any freedom, but freedom defined by responsibility built on the provisions of the law, the power to do, allowing it to be done. That freedom that's mixed up with the rule of law, from the perspective of guaranteeing the rule of law itself, right up the normative perspective of the law bounds. Understand that this conference is not discussing the model of democracy, whether liberal or illiberal, but the responsibilities of the citizen, of the individual to faithfully comply with the law in order to have access to freedom. Remember, to be free to do or not to do by virtue of the law. In these terms, there is a return to the breaking point of the previous system for the current system of law, that I will, with permission to those who think differently, define as the material strengthening of constitutions through the regulation, guarantee, and access to the fundamental rights, especially in the area of fundamental freedoms, whose legal milestone is the approval and ratification of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I can't talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights without mentioning its long resistance for 75 years, the anniversary of which was celebrated last December by RC26 on human rights of IPSA, with two events, an international congress and a webinar. I therefore congratulate the institution involved, particularly RC26, in the presence of its chair. Congratulations, JJ. On 23 March 2024, Resolution 266 of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly was adopted, proclaiming 2025 as the International Year of Peace and Trust, an opportune moment to rethink human rights in the context of the culture of peace, promoting a new global social pact to respect and guarantee fundamental freedoms, including press freedom. On this occasion, I invite you to follow the educationforpeace.eu project from 7th May. Having made the necessary note, I will return to the conference on the basis of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, a charter of proposals aimed to the movement for the moral construction of human beings through the imputation of responsibilities to be read as the transposition of access to and respect for freedoms into the legal orders of states at a level of balance between rights and duties in accordance with the terms of this conference. Since then, freedoms have been labeled as fundamental, constituting freedoms that are indispensable to individuals. Furthermore, they began to be treated differently among the various manifestations of the power that to do. It is as if we were saying, here are the freedoms, and here are the limits to their access. Choose those that are most important to you, but also respect the choice of the other individuals. So, given that today we are talking about press freedom, how should we understand Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Anyone who wants a definitive answer to this question will be frustrated. What I propose is to contribute to reflection on the interpretation of the legal provision, encouraging individual response, even if it's a personal opinion with no scientific interest. The idea is to think about the interpretation of Article 19 in three dimensions: the dare to inform, the right to express an opinion responsibly, and public control over the act without barrier, whether public or private. Again, I'm sorry to frustrate you. We can talk scientifically about each of the dimensions on another occasion and with more time to speak. But for now, I'd rate to present some practical issues. I know that studies of each dimension simulate numerous scientific theses that vary according to the constitutional structure of each sovereign state. I know that out of constitution should be legal norms for delimiting the exercise of political power. They are often treated as political charter for legitimizing government speech, undermine democracy or the privilege of demagogy. I know that the world, unfortunately, experience a linear crisis of intolerance that on the one hand jeopardizes democracy itself from electoral representation to popular sovereignty, and on the other hand, it stimulates the search for information that is increasingly accessible and without limits. I also realize that press freedom goes hand in hand with freedom of information, freedom of expression, and freedom of communication, and is below freedom of profession. These are the points that slowly, in a few minutes I have left, to renew my willingness to talk about the three dimensions another time, so that I can briefly present four curious cases that are interconnected by the values of press freedom, even though they happened in different countries and spheres. So, if we don't talk scientifically about the three dimensions, I anticipate that the conclusion will be to form an awareness of acting according to the judge to inform responsibly for public control of the acts reported. Furthermore, the case took place in Portugal and Brazil, two of which were committed by journalists and two members of parliament in the exercise of their representative political mandates, taking on the role of journalists. For a better understanding, I have divided the case in two groups, journalists and members of parliament. In the first group, a Portuguese journalist accuses the president of the Portuguese Republic through the traditional media and his personal social channels of selling out the country to international economic interests, reporting on the speech and presenting documents. The same journalist shortly afterwards accuses the Brazilian government of democratic deviation and the Brazilian Supreme Constitutional Court of censorship and political persecution, and is invited to clarify the information in the Brazilian parliament. Knowing the risks, he was running in Brazil, he asked for and obtained protection and political support from the Portuguese government and the president of the Portuguese Republic. How can this case be understood in the light of the press freedom? A Brazilian journalist, the next case, is imprisoned for 368 days by order of the Supreme Constitutional Court on charges of fake news that undermines the democratic rule of law, without a public complaint made by a competent authority and alerted by the constitutional public prosecution bodies about possible illegalities and insufficient evidence. How should this case be understood in the light of press freedom? In the second group, a member of the Portuguese parliament accuses the president of his country of betraying his country by publicly recognizing, let's say, a historical fault in what he considered to be an inadequate political speech, respecting the media's dissemination of his opinion, both public and private, and then going up to the plenary session of the Portuguese parliament to carry out his parliamentary duties. How can this case be understood in the light of the press freedom? A federal deputy, the last case, in the Chamber of Deputies, party of Brazil's Bicameral National Congress, is threatened with arrest by the Brazilian Supreme Constitutional Court and suspension from his personal social network because the press reported on his speech of political opposition in the constitutional exercise of the floor of the Chamber of the Deputies. How can this case be understood in the light of the press freedom? My dear friends, as I said, my intention today was to contribute to reflection by simulating the development of press freedom. I hope I have at last managed to generate curiosity about the complexity of the issue and the realities of how it's dealt with in political and legal life, availed in constitutional order that historically complement each other. If you allow me one last proposition, the guarantee of freedoms, or even the construction of democracy, is not achieved by governments or law, but for performing the awareness to act in accordance with the law created to guarantee the freedoms defined by the values of the people. In short, freedom and democracy are achieved through education inspired by the values of tolerance, respect, and dialogue in the pursuit of equality at all levels. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a good conference, everyone. JJ, back to you.
Alex, thank you very much for presenting democratic values in the context of media freedom from perspective Brazilian and Portugal perspective. I should add also that Alex is also chair-elect of RC26 of IPSA. Once again, congratulations, and thank you for once again for your speech. Now, I think I can see that we have connection with Professor Leonardo Vizul from Brazil. Welcome, Professor, here on this RC26 webinar. But now I think that we can jump to the Mexico because there is a Mr. Javier Garza Ramos. Yeah, we can hear. Can you Javier? Can you hear us once again?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you
okay, so once again, thank you very much for joining the session. Let me introduce Javier in a very shortly way. Javier Garza Ramos is a journalist based in Torreon, on the north of Mexico, where he founded and heads Horizonte Leguero, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, a local news platform and radio and the social media. He also co-hosts El Noti, one of the most popular news podcasts in Mexico. For the past 15 years, he has also worked in journalist protection and press freedom issues. As editorial director of El Siglo de Torreon, he led a newsroom that came under fire from drug cartels operating in his city, and developed safety protocols that are now used by newsroom covering violence in several countries, where he has trained dozens of journalists of safety issues. He was a Knight Fellow of the International Center for Journalists working on digital security and has led programs on newsroom management and the World Association of News Publishers and the Inter-American Press Association. Javier serves on the board of the World Editors Forum, Article 19, and Mexico National Commission to Prevent Discrimination, has given conference on press freedom and media development around the world. He is the author of 9 shots in an in-depth investigation of the school shooting in his hometown of Torreon in 2020 and co-author of Reconquering La Laguna, a study on crime, prevention, and pacification in his hometown. In 2022, he received the Maria Moores Cabot Prize for Journalists in the Americas, given by Columbia University. He is a graduate of the Universidad Iberoamérica in Mexico City and the University of Texas at Austin. Javier, I lately read that many Mexican journalists in the end of April demonstrated against the murder of one of the journalists, Mexican journalists, Roberto Carlos Quiguaros Bastos. but I also read that almost 40 persons has been murdered during the last 5 or 6 years. Could you present us the challenges for media freedom from a Mexican perspective? And could you tell us it is possible to be a journalist? It is safe job or rather crazy challenge? Javier, once again, thank you very much for joining the session. It's a great honor hosting you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacek. I have to say that it is double privilege for me that this invitation came from Poland, a country that I like very much and that has a great tradition of press that I admire. And just as you were struggling with with the Spanish, I remember once when I went to visit the newsroom of Gazeta in Łódź many years ago, and I really wanted to read the newspaper because I had heard a lot about its history, but I could not. I just had to look at it, but I really could not read it. But I admire the struggle also that for press freedom that has come out of Poland and that has really served as an example. So the situation in Mexico, I would say, and I would go back a little bit and try to draw a bit of parallel with Poland precisely, and other countries that many countries might see reflected in what I'm about to say. Mexico had long history of press news organizations. Press freedom was really non-existent when there was a one-party rule in Mexico for much of the 20th century. And just as that one-party rule started to crumble in the 1980s and the 90s, there was a increasingly open climate for the press, for independent journalism to flourish, for investigative journalism, for news organizations that would break out from government dominance and into, explore new ways of doing journalism. And you had talk radio, for example, exploded in Mexico and became very, very popular because it was very independent. New newspapers that were being founded in the 1990s. Television started opening up as well, news magazines. And then, of course, the internet brought a wide array of sources of information for the public. So to be a journalist was really exciting, let's say at the turn of the century, because there was a lot of promise. There was a great climate of press freedom in the country. And I would say that, Poland was a little bit like this, also at the turn of the century, and most of the countries in Eastern Europe and other places that started to shed authoritarian governments and opened up to democracy. So for my generation and for a lot of Mexican journalists, it was a time of great promise that as Mexico's transition to democracy started falling into disarray, and organized crime started taking advantage of many of the power vacuums that were being left by the end of the authoritarian regimes. Organized crime basically took hold of Mexican institutions. And one of the institutions that criminals want to control at some point is the press, right? So in the early years of this century, we started seeing a lot of attacks against the press coming from organized crime. That led into a deterioration of, that led to you could call it a deterioration of the culture of press freedom, that public officials sort of started feeling they also had a license to attack the press, to attack journalists that they didn't like. And so there was this very dangerous, very toxic mix of organized crime, public officials, security forces aligned against journalists because they didn't like coverage. And you cannot say that it is has one particular characteristics, like say it is organized crime that is doing that is responsible for the violence, or it is public officials. It is mostly a mix. You cannot say that it is focused on one part of the country, because while we might have right now, say in southern Mexico, might be most of the crimes against journalists this year. Next year, it can be in the central part of the country, or the other year can be in the northern part. It sort of moves around without any established pattern. And I guess all of this chaotic scenario in which journalists are attacked anywhere by any number of different forces or agents, different kinds of attackers, from criminals to public officials to police officers to army forces to social groups. It all boils down to a problem of rule of law. And it is the lack of a culture of the rule of law that has facilitated this climate of violence in which, more than 40 journalists have been killed in the past 5 years in the term of the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who has also exacerbated this this climate, because we were coming from the year 2000, from the mid 2000s, 2005, 6, so on, increasingly with increasing numbers of attacks against journalists each year. But then in the past 5 years under this government with President López Obrador, we have had a new element, which is the president's contempt for the media, and the fact that he takes his podium every morning and blasts the media and says that journalists are corrupt, they are his enemies, they are his adversaries, they are part of an elite that wants to topple him. And so he creates a climate of distrust, of discord, of hatred against the press, in which his supporters might feel emboldened or empowered to do harm to a journalist, or maybe a public official who wants to, I don't know, order the kidnapping of a journalist to beat him up, or order the assassination of a journalist, might say, well, if the president doesn't like journalists, then it's okay, right? They might feel themselves with permission to take action against the president. That is a very dangerous development. So it all boils down really to rule of law. López Obrador came into office promising that he would support the institutions that investigated crimes against journalists and that were designed to protect journalists. He has defunded them. He has taken away the funding, and really has not pushed for the investigation of any meaningful crime against journalists. So I think the problem is really not who is in government, because we are in the same place with this government from one party than we were in the previous government, which was from another party. But it is more a structural problem. It's a problem of the rule of law. The reason why a criminal, a public official, police commander would attack a journalist right now is because they have the reasonable expectation that they will get away with it. And they know that because the last person who attacked the journalist got away with it. Impunity really is the fuel that animates and that feeds the crimes and the attacks against journalists. And I'm not only talking about murders, which are the most visible. I am talking about any number of forms of violence, even beyond physical, kidnappings, beatings, but also intimidation, harassment, surveillance, hacking, phone tapping, threats, legal pressures, any number of ways to intimidate or harass a journalist. And so that is really what we have fallen into, in that the great expectation of press freedom was accompanied really by the fact that people started losing, they stopped paying attention to what the press was saying. They stopped caring about a free press. And criminals, corruption, they stepped into that vacuum and created a climate of violence. There have been several institutions created to address this problem, like the protection mechanism for journalists, in which journalists that say you have a journalist gets a threat, he can call this mechanism and get protection, he can get relocated, he can get bodyguards or something. There is also a special prosecutor for crimes against journalists, that if a journalist gets killed, the federal prosecutor, the federal attorney general, can take control of the investigation precisely to prevent local authorities from investigating the crime, because sometimes local authorities are involved in the crime. But really, none of this has worked. Many journalists who were under the protection of the protection mechanism have been killed, despite the fact that they were quote unquote protected. And the special prosecutor does not prosecute the crimes against journalists. So there is no investigation, there are no arrests, there are no trials, and certainly there are no sentences. And that is why many people, anyone who wants to harm a journalist now, can sort of think that they can get away with it. And again, you can see how this is a structural problem and how this is a problem of the rule of law. If you simply go to other countries and say, France, Great Britain, Spain, the United States, they don't have all the institutions that Mexico has, right? But they don't need them because they have a culture of rule of law. It is a culture in which the person who kills a journalist today will probably be in jail next week and will probably be in jail the rest of his life for that crime. So, we keep creating these institutions, and the problem keeps getting worse, and we arrive at a paradox in that we had less attacks against journalists 20 years ago, when none of these institutions existed, when we didn't have protection mechanisms and special prosecutors. We had less crimes against journalists at that point in time than we do now, that we have all of these institutions that are supposed to protect journalists. So there is this suspicion, I mean, it's certainly my theory, and other people share it, that these institutions have been created sort of to appease international observers, international organizations, and say the UN comes in, the special rapporteur comes in and says, we recommend that Mexico have a special prosecutor. So they create the special prosecutor and nothing happens. Things keep getting worse. So that is the state of affairs in Mexico right now, in which I think we are coming to the realization that it is really not an issue of who is in the government, but more about building a culture of the rule of law.
Javier, thank you very much for this Mexican perspective. I discovered in Reporters Without Borders Index that last year the position of Mexico, it was 128. Now this is 121. So it means that the situation is better. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, almost 40 journalists has been murdered, yeah, during the last years. How you can, what's happened that we can say that the situation is, okay, a little bit better. Poland is almost in the same situation. Of course, in 2023, we was on the 57th position, now in 47 position, yeah. But this is still, from our perspective, this is a very pessimistic vision of freedom of expression in Poland, yeah.
Well, I think that any movement in an index like the one you mentioned, any movement that is 2 or 3 places up or down is really marginal and it's really not significant. But I would also say that if you say there is an upward movement when it seems to be improving again, quote unquote, it might be because these indices they are basically average certain measurements. And so maybe we can improve in a certain measurement and do worse in another one, but the improvement would maybe outweigh the other trend. But if Mexico, for example, has had improvements in internet access and access to information technology, and that counts a lot in many of these measurements of press freedom, because it, of course, gives people access to technology to be better informed. Well, theoretically, be better informed. So I would say that this is very relative, because yes, we might have improvements in the sense of saying yes, there are more technology tools. Maybe there are more media outlets. That can also be the case. But more media outlets don't necessarily mean better media outlets. But the fact is that the number of aggressions they keep climbing. Now, as far as the technology goes, I'd just like to address a question here from Furkan Ahmed. I thank for your question, and he asks, how do you see the elements of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news in causing more harm to the journalists in Mexico and beyond, and the measures taken to combat these elements? Which I think is really the pertinent question for our era, especially right now that we have a presidential election in Mexico, that we are less than a month away. It's a plague, it really is a pest, disinformation and misinformation. And for us, for journalists, it's very, very hard to deal with. But I think that, you can see where the motivation comes to put fake news out there, and who benefits and who it harms. My concern is that audiences are not sufficiently educated, not because we don't want to, not because we might be lazy, but just because the process of educating ourselves in being more critical of the information that we receive, so that we can tell between legitimate news and fake news, the process of educating ourselves is much slower than the speed with which fake news spread and the new modalities by which they spread. The speed by which we are going to be able to create tools, for example, to temper the effects of artificial intelligence, for example, in the news, are always going to be much slower than the development of artificial intelligence itself, and the way that it can, that it can damage the process of news gathering and news dissemination. I think that is always going to be a problem, and we have to trust that audiences are becoming more and more educated and more critical. I think I would go back to the pandemic, which I think the pandemic taught us a lot of lessons for journalism. But I remember in the pandemic, especially in the early days of the pandemic, with so much uncertainty and fear, and we didn't know what was going on. I started getting a lot of screenshots or links from friends or other people and saying, have you seen this? Is this true? Can you check it out? That means that they received something and they did not validate it automatically, which is sometimes what we do with fake news, is that we see it, we read it, we immediately believe it, and we immediately share it. At least maybe in some cases, of course, and some people, not all of them, but it's something. At least now, some of us are pausing for a minute and thinking, well, maybe this piece of information that I got on WhatsApp or on Facebook, maybe it doesn't ring a bell. Let me check it out. And I started also getting, for example, in my podcast, a lot of requests for people to explain, how to do a basic search in especially right now that there's a lot of information about the elections. If I receive something on my WhatsApp, what can I do instead of going to a fact-checking website or something? What can I do to check it out, right? And so we can give 2 or 3 pointers about, take the headline and type it on Google and see if there are other stories about it. That maybe means that it's legitimate. If not, that maybe that means that it is fake, and so on. But what I mean is, we have to keep getting ourselves educated. Otherwise, we are going to succumb to fake news, to disinformation, which, coupled with violence against the media, is really the defining marks of this trend, in which I think society as a whole is losing respect for a culture of press freedom.
Javier, thank you very much once again. It was very interesting perspective from practical point of view. Thank you very much. So good luck, and please be safe in Mexico. Yeah. Once again, thank you very much. And now we can jump from Mexico to Prague, because there is Dominika Bychawska-Siniarska. Dominika, can you hear us? Dominika?
Okay.
Yes. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Let me introduce you in a very shortly way. Dominika is an experienced human rights lawyer. She previously worked at the European Court of Human Rights and has been the director of the Media Freedom Observatory at the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights since 2008. She has also served on the advisory panel of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights and was a member of the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights Management board for 5 years. For her contribution to freedom of speech, Dominika got an award of Article 54 of the Polish Constitution. And I should add that Dominika was co-organizer of a very interesting conference about anti-SLAPP. It happened 1 week ago in Warsaw, organized by also Agora Publishers House. Dominika, once again, thank you very much. I know that you have a very tightly schedule on this evening, but in a very shortly way, can you present us the issue or problem or challenge of SLAPP and solution for anti-SLAPP regulation? Okay.
Thank you very much, Jędrzej, for this welcome and this introduction. And also, I'm really honored to be here today and among the wonderful speakers. Listening to Javier, I really had chills, because we are lucky in Europe, and as recent report of ECPMF and the Rapid Response Initiative mentioned, Europe is a safe haven for journalists as far as safety is concerned. However, we have other problems, and one of the most burning problems currently is the question of slabs, so strategic lawsuits against public participation. And this is not a problem that has occurred suddenly. It has existed for years, but only now we started to label the problems as slabs. And the notion of slabs obviously comes from US and has been developed at the University of Denver in the 1970s by Penelope Cannon and George Pringa. So we only took the notion and the name in order to label some legal actions that are instituted in order to threaten, intimidate, and harass the target in order to prevent and restrict or even penalize free expression on matters of public interest and the exercise of rights associated with public participation. By who can be the target of slabs? It can be obviously journalists, but also publishers, media organizations, whistleblowers, human rights defenders, but also activists, civil society organizations, NGOs, trade unions, artists, researchers, and academics. And the aim of strategic lawsuit is basically to chill someone's expression, to prevent them of taking part in the public debate. And by public debate, we need to understand everything which concerns public affairs. It can be an online or offline discussion, and it can concern fundamental rights, public health, safety, environment, climate, everything which concerns the criticism of the government, of the legislative, executive or judicial bodies or organs. Slabs can take many different forms and are subject to various provisions in national legislative framework. So in Poland, they are mostly criminal or civil defamation cases opened against mostly journalists, bloggers, or activists. But recently, during the last 8 years, we also faced a number of petty offenses, being sometimes the question of interrupting the public order because someone was protesting on the street, or defaming a statue. So everything which had to prevent via legal proceeding, protest or symbolic speech. We also faced some abusing regulatory powers by authorities such as the Broadcasting Council, which was imposing and still continue to impose disproportionate fines on the independent broadcasters. And this also should be labeled as slabs. In other countries of Europe, of Central and Eastern Europe, we have variation of those slabs. Usually they are opened by public institutions or institutions affiliated to the government. So very often state-owned enterprises which are using the public money in order to harass the voices which are participating in public debate. In Hungary, for instance, slabs mostly are based on data protection. So as you know, the data protection regulation and the EU GDPR is very complicated. So it's really easy to target a publisher's house, a media based on those regulations. And what is difference between Central European and Eastern European slabs and the Western European is that the Western are usually opened by and established by the proceedings against voices taking part in public participation are established by big enterprises, let's say private entities. Whether in Central Eastern Europe, these are mostly governmental bodies. And as to say, we don't have really meaningful statistics on the number of slabs. However, there is a coalition of NGOs called CEST, which is collecting data from across Europe. And from the data, it stands that the recent years, the biggest amount of slabs was occurred in Poland, but also France was in the lead, Malta, Croatia, were the country where those slabs occurred the most often. However, those data are not really reliable. Probably the number of slabs is much bigger than there. According to those data, we have 128 slabs in Poland in 2023. Which probably is much higher than that, as only Agora, one of the biggest publishing houses in Poland, have declared that they have 70 of these cases. However, it is very difficult. Not all the media want to admit and give the numbers and admit that they have a slab. So gathering the information is very difficult. And in order to reply to the problem of slabs in Europe, the EU has adopted a directive, a very fresh directive, which has been published on the 16th of April and will come into force actually today, because it's 20 days after publication. If I'm not counting properly, it's today. And European countries will have 2 years to implement the directive. The directive is obliging the states to introduce in their legal order an early dismissal of unfounded claims. So whenever there will be a slab case open, the person against whom the slab is open can claim that this is a slab and that this is a manifestly unfounded claim. And the court will have to analyze this in that perspective in a very speedy manner and dismiss the case as early as possible. Moreover, the burden of proving that the claim is well-founded has to rest on the claimant who brought the action. And the directive also introduced remedies against abusive court proceedings. So the fact that all the costs of the proceedings will be lying on the person who brought the action, and there will also be penalties against such actions, because very often slabs are open not to win the case, but actually to cause to the victim, so a journalist, just to pay hilarious costs for the legal defense and for the court proceedings. So the directive will remedy that situation. Also, in complementary to the directive, we have the Council of Europe recommendation adopted on the 5th of April 2024. So also very recent measures, which gives a very good definitions, 10 points that the judge will need to look into to analyze whether the case is a slab or not and whether it should be early dismissed or not. Moreover, the recommendation and the directive introduces the obligation for judges to be trained and for the state to gather statistics. So as I mentioned, we don't have proper statistics now. There will be a legal obligation whenever the directive will be introduced. What is the problem of the directive? It only concerns actions which are cross-border. So the defendant and the claimant had to be in two various EU countries, and it only tackles civil cases. However, in the preamble of the directive, the EU is asking the states to treat the directive as the minimum, and states should go and are enhanced to go beyond the directive. So to have the measures I mentioned to you, so the early dismissal and the remedies against abusive court proceedings restricted not only to civil proceedings, but also the criminal ones, or maybe others like the data protection proceedings, whenever this is the problem of the country. And also to go beyond the cross-border, because obviously we have the forum shopping and a lot of proceedings open in the UK, because the cost of legal proceedings are much higher there. But most 99% of Slavs from Poland or other Central European countries are purely national. So in order to give protection against Slavs, our countries will need to go beyond the directive and have these remedies implemented only to national proceedings. And now, as I'm speaking as civil society representative, we are in a struggle to have the directive implemented nationally. So there is already a draft law in Malta and the UK, which is processed by the respective parliaments. In Poland, during the conference that Jędrzej mentioned at the beginning, we managed to have a strong declaration from the Minister of Justice that he will do his best to have a much broader implementation of the directive, so going beyond the cross-border and the civil proceeding minimum. And so far in the EU, we only have Lithuania that has some kind of anti-SLAPS provision, but we are adopted much earlier actually than the directive or the Council of Europe recommendation. So now we are looking into the future, and we just hope that the respective governments, including the Polish governments, will adopt the most broader definition and remedies of protection against SLAPS.
Dominika, thank you very much for presenting the problem of SLAP. I hope that the implementation of EU directive will wait not very long in Poland, because I believe that declaration of Minister Bodnar, it will be very, very true words, and we will implementing this document very shortly. Thank you very much, Dominika. Any question to our guest and speaker? Okay, thank you very much, Dominika, once again. And I hope that we can jump from Prague to we can fly to Pakistan, because I hope that there is still Professor Shaista Tabassum. Dear Professor, can you hear us or not? We are also waiting for connection with Professor Enrique Armijo from United States, but it will be maybe a few minutes after the 7. However, I'm not sure, Professor Tabassum, are you with us or not?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay. Oh, welcome. It's a great honor for me hosting you. But I know I'm sorry, because I'm sure I know that in Pakistan there is a late hour. Yeah. Very shortly, I would like to introduce Professor Shaista Tabassum is a Dean of Faculty of Arts and Social Science, University of Karachi, Pakistan, and Professor of International Relations. Yeah, so I hope that Professor will present the problem of freedom of expression in the context of right to information. Yeah, from the Pakistan of Asian perspective, Professor Tabassum, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am really thankful to the organization, to the host, that they have given me time to give my views on this important issue, which has been faced by not only by the Pakistani media journalists, but all over the world. When we go into the details of the mass media, it plays a significant role in the socio-economic development of low-income countries, and it is by strengthening democracy, social development, gender equality, nation building, education provisions, all the social fabrics of the society. The media played an important role in the development process of the global south by other functions, raising awareness among the public about various development issues, including health, education in the rural areas, agriculture development, gender equality, and social development. In the case of Pakistan, science and environmental journalism is crucial for sustainable development. And this is, in fact, it's a crucial for, it range from facilitation of good governance to social cohesion, peace, public participation, empowerment, and inclusion. Here, the media plays an important role in the development of particular sectors of Pakistani economy, especially agriculture, which can benefit from science and environmental communication in the media, as farming has become a more scientific and knowledge-based field, and it's frequently affected by environmental issues. The media can also help to bridge the gap between science and the public and even educate for science, taking a more general view of science communication in Pakistan, which includes media coverage of various governmental scientific initiatives. Here, the picture of the media participation and its role is mixed, because the communication campaign implemented by Pakistani government as part of the UNICEF drive to eradicate polio is partly successful. The media campaign to raise awareness and eliminate misconception about HIV AIDS in Pakistan have not changed public attitude. Even that the polio campaign has been undermined recently by misinformation campaign on social media. The Pakistani media have a central role to play in informing the public about scientific and environmental topics, but their communication must be well crafted in order to engage and resonate with the public. Environmental conservation is often at odds with development, despite being rich in nature resources. Pakistan struggled to strike for balance between economic growth and the conservation to the environment, which is consistent with the global norm. Research shows that in the developing countries such as Pakistan, the media often foregrounds economic development and ignores its environmental cost. In the quest for economic growth, environmental protection often loses its relevance. However, Pakistan is vulnerable to environmental and climatic change issues that directly threaten the economy, infrastructure, and the agriculture, resulting in food security and health issues. Researchers believe that environmental journalism in Pakistan can be more informative to the public, and many environmental issues that are influencing the life of the people may have future economic consequences for the nation. Here we can say that the role of the media is especially important when it comes to covering the environment and climatic change. There is less media focus on environmental issues in South Asia, which is often associated with commercialism, concentration of media ownership, because covering environmental news may mean challenging powerful corporations, governments, and other, as well as offending the potential advertisers. And as we all know that Pakistan is among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to the climatic impacts. Yet there are multiple socio-economic, political, and scientific factors at play in keeping the coverage levels very low. And these low-level coverages are partly due to the focus on breaking news and sensationalism in large parts of the commercial media sector, with news organizations, proprietors uninterested in reporting the non-profitable issues of climate change. Furthermore, there is a poor climate literacy and awareness among common masses, which has contributed to the awareness that may be possible to the general people. Furthermore, there is a poor climate literacy and awareness among common masses. However, when we look at the researchers, they argue that the media's responsibility is not limited to the dissemination of information on issues such as water, energy, health, and environment, but it's actually to mobilize the public in order to put pressure on elected representatives to initiate policy response to the climate crisis. The public can pressurize the government to immediate policy response. There is when we look at the importance of the science and environmental journalism, it's often critical for the journalistic practices. They have found that science journalism seems uncritical, often focused on economic prosperity through scientific development. And there are also institutions and professional challenges that affect the coverage of science and the environment. For example, when we look at the local media, especially the print media, we find that there's a very small space for the science stories, and they are believed to be the unreliable sources. And the pressure of there is the pressure on the journalists to meet the deadlines, and the media industry is commercialized at a very significant level, and that is affecting the science journalism. And environmental and scientific journalists are not motivated and encouraged by newsroom colleagues, while editors also lack interest in scientific reportings and topics. And there is also an additional issue, that is the financial support for the investigative reporting and dedicated space for scientific and environmental issues in the newspaper. There is, as far as the Pakistani situation in Pakistan, it's a home to an extensive media landscape featuring a multilingual media houses. The print media sector, there is English, Urdu, the local language, and there are a number of other regional languages, Balochi, Sindhi, Punjabi, Saraiki, a number of the regional languages. But interestingly, there are major 6 media houses which owns almost the entire media. 6 groups: Dawn Group, Jung Group, the Express Group, the ARY Group, etc. And they completely control over the information, the media, the journalists as well. And when we look at the working conditions, it significantly influences the ability of the journalists to carry out their normative functions in Pakistan. The working environment for the journalists, especially in Pakistan, is very difficult. There are a number of the political parties, there are religious organizations, the extremists and the militant groups, and along with that, the agencies, the intelligence government agencies, they pose a direct threat to the journalists. And therefore, there is a physical safety of the journalists is a very serious concern, especially for those people, for those journalists who are working in the remote areas. And there are large number of the cases of journalists being either kidnapped, killed, or beaten. The beaters, the kidnappers are not unknown. And such a working environment has implications for the physical, emotional, mental state of media practitioners in Pakistan. And reporting is actually a very, very difficult task. Then there is a highly commercialized media sector, highly commercialized, together with proprietors, links to the advertisers, the financial sectors. So the concentration of ownership and competition for profit within the media industry represent a significant challenge to the ethical standards of journalism. Furthermore, the advertiser can exert influence on environmental journalists. In addition to the political, economic factors at play, journalists also face threats in terms of their job security, apart from excessive work, tight deadlines, and the lack of the professional training. Along with that, the attitude of the editors and the newsroom colleagues is also particularly related to the information and the news. It's also effect on the morale of those journalists who are working on that particular area of environment, especially when there are environmental beat where more field work is involved. So the attitude of the editors and the media owner discourage the environmental journalists, and they are the journalists are not motivated.
I'm sorry. May I ask you for conclusion, because we have connection also with 3 speakers, and I'm afraid that we have only 45 minutes. So if I may ask you for a conclusion, it will be great. I'm sorry for interruption. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. I must say that these types of issues have been faced by Pakistani journalists in a large number, and there is, I believe that these types of the activities like the one that you have been hosting is really an encouragement, especially for those who are working in the field of environment and science journalism. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for very interesting speech. And once again, I'm sorry for so late time in Pakistan. I'm sure that we are very tired. Once again, thank you very much for joining this session. And I can see that we have the connection with the United States and Professor Enrique Armijo from Elon University School of Law, Professor of Law and at Elon University School of Law and a faculty affiliate at Yale Law School's Information Society Project and UNC Chapel Hill's Center for Information Technology and Public Life. Professor Enrique Armijo serves as a research fellow at the George Washington University's Institute for Data, Democracy and Politics, where he works on issues related to disinformation and democracy. He has published several leading law journals and for public audience. Welcome, Professor. Thank you very much for joining this session. And we discussed before this meeting, and you proposed such topic, government interaction with the press, lessons from social media. Professor, the floor is yours. Once again, thank you very much. It's a great honor hosted you here in this session.
No, thank you so much for the organizing committee for inviting me. This is a wonderful treat for me to get to hear about issues facing the press around the world. I am going to try to share my screen. I have a short slide deck. Hopefully this works. I guess I'm not a presenter or moderator, so I may not be able to do that, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to assign me any sharing rights. I'll just.
It's possible. You can have on the right side of your screen the arrow, yeah, and when you put on this point, there will be possibility to show your screen, your presentation.
I am now a moderator, and it looks like I can do that. And there we go. Did that work?
Right. Yeah.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah,
yeah, thank you very much.
Go ahead and start this up. Thank you. So as we talked about, that this is kind of my topic about government press interactions and the First Amendment. But and I know I have a very limited amount of time, but I would have been remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. right now, of which I'm sure you all are well aware. So let me just talk a little bit about that, and then I'll move on to the main topic. And in terms of constitutionally, and again, I'm sure any of you all who have studied the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and its influence on freedom of expression across the world are familiar with the fact that the United States First Amendment has a press clause. We have a free speech clause of no Congress shall make no law breaking freedom of speech, and also of the press. So we have actually express textual constitutional protection for the press, at least in theory, in our Constitution. Indeed, the Supreme Court has often said that the U.S. Supreme Court has often said that the right to receive ideas is a necessary predicate to the exercise of one's own rights under the First Amendment. So even though we don't have an actual enumerated right to receive information the way that many of our international freedom of expression instruments and many of our constitutions in other countries have, the court has kind of recognized this idea to receive ideas. However, the Supreme Court here has also said that the press clause does not give any additional rights that the speech clause does. And this came up in the case, again, many of you I'm sure have studied the case of Brandsburg versus Hayes from the early 1970s, where some reporters sought to quash a grand jury subpoena concerning some of their reporting. They said that the Constitution provides a privilege, a qualified privilege, from disclosing information and disclosing confidential sources. And the court in that case says, so far as the Constitution is concerned, there's no special immunity from the application of general laws. Now, many states, individual states here in the States, and many countries, including many of the countries in which you all are living and working, have passed statutory privileges with respect to what journalists are forced to reveal or not to reveal. But I'm strictly talking about any constitutional preferential treatment for the press, given its function in a democratic society. And I think, unfortunately, most of us scholars of the press would say the answer to that question is no. The First Amendment does not provide any special protections. So what does that mean? That means that there are no exemption of laws of general applicability for speech. There you see on the left side of the screen some encampments at Columbia University from students protesting the war in Gaza. On the right, a lot of protest activity involving violations of general law. And basically none of these protesters have a First Amendment defense because, again, there's no exemption of laws of general applicability for speech. And that also applies to journalists. So when we've seen, especially in the recent few weeks, not just protesters being arrested on college campuses, but journalists trying to cover those protesters being arrested as well, we don't really see the First Amendment as a matter of constitutional law appearing in these controversies, except to the extent that there's norms around how journalists should or should not be treated, whether or not the right to dissemination of information should or should not be respected. And unfortunately, as we all well know, when we're trying to rely on norms rather than laws, that's much less sturdy ground for journalists here in the States to rely on. So the upshot of all of that is we have a robust set of First Amendment-based protections, gathering, disseminating information, but journalists hold no special status under the United States Constitution, even though we have that express enumerated provision about the press. We like to say here in the States that it's the only industry that has a provision in the Constitution that applies to it. Unfortunately, because of interpretations of the court since especially given the Brandsburg case, and since the Brandsburg case, we basically say that there are no real extra protections for the dissemination and collection of information when the person doing that is employed by a news gathering and news disseminating industry. So what I really wanted to talk about, what I propose to talk about, is something slightly different, and that's the interaction between the government on the one hand and disseminators of information on the other hand. And this brings up something that's come to be known as jawboning. Jawboning, the term itself actually has a biblical provenance. If you have some time, you can look up where the term comes from. But basically, the term involves what it refers to as this efforts on the part of the government to try to persuade disseminators of speech from disseminating speech by other parties that the government doesn't like. Something that I think it's clear the government could not do through its formal exercises of power. So mechanisms like legislation, the government is trying to use its powers of persuasion to get disseminators of speech to forfeit speech rights. And as I'll talk about, this issue has most obviously come up in the context of social media. But there has been a tradition in the First Amendment of not a, maybe tradition is too strong a word. There's really only one case involving it back in the 1960s. There's a case called Bantam Books versus Sullivan, where the state of Rhode Island said that certain books it set up a commission that had the power to deem certain books obscene, empowered the commission to go out to bookstores and try to persuade those bookstores that they might be liability if they continue to carry those books. And what the Supreme Court said is that violated the First Amendment. This was kind of the government trying to achieve through informal means what it couldn't do through formal means. That was a prior restraint that violated the First Amendment. This idea of jawboning was occasionally applied in cases, again, where the government was trying to persuade things like, in one example, in the Backpage versus Dart case, where there's a sheriff that's putting pressure on credit card processors to host a Backpage, which, as you might remember, was a commercial sex work advertising site, threatens the payment processors with federal criminal child trafficking liability, sex trafficking liability. The court in that instance steps in and says that's not permissible. So this was kind of the context until we get to the case that was formerly called Missouri versus Biden, now called Murthy versus Biden. And in the Murthy case, you had people who were involved in what we would here in the States would call the anti-vax movement, who were posting things online during the height of the pandemic, and the government would go to the platforms and say, please take this down, it violates your terms of service. And in some of those cases, the platforms, again, private platforms like Facebook and then Twitter, agreed and would take that information down. So as a result of that, some of those folks who were whose content was taken down from the website sued agencies and individuals in the federal government, saying that this pressure, this jawboning of the private companies, violated the private companies' First Amendment rights. And the reason the case kind of proceeds in that direction is, again, as I'm sure many of you know, we have a fairly robust state action doctrine in the United States constitutional law, which says the Constitution applies to public actors, not private actors. And there were some cases where speakers whose speech was taken down by the platforms would challenge the platforms themselves as having violated the First Amendment. In those cases, universally failed on the ground that the courts reviewing those cases would say that those platforms were not government actors for purposes of the First Amendment. And here you basically see from this slide that these plaintiffs basically sued everybody in the government. And they sought an injunction preventing the government from speaking with these platforms to try to take down speech. And the Fifth Circuit, which is one of our intermediate appellate courts, actually agreed with that argument. So recognizing the fact, however, and the Supreme Court was very focused on this fact, as I'll talk about in a minute, government has to speak, right? Government has to have the ability to persuade. That's the kind of the bully pulpit, right? The government has to be able to step in and say, look, we think this speech is hurting people. So the courts in reviewing these jawboning cases have tried to walk this line, and the ways that they've done it is coming up with the concepts of coercion and significant encouragement. And as you see on the slide, the courts have said, again, applying those non-social media cases to the current context that says when the government coerces the platform to take down the private speech, that violates the First Amendment, right? Softer version of that is the significant encouragement theory, where the court also said that if the state is here, the agencies that are talking to the platforms are in close collaboration with the private platforms, that too can violate the First Amendment. So what the Fifth Circuit does, it recognizes these theories, fairly robust versions of these theories, and enjoins the government across all areas of government from talking to platforms about user speech. And as you can surely predict, the government freaked out, right? The government said we have to be able to talk about platforms that are causing harm. And when this case was appealed to the Supreme Court, there was some real concern, even among conservative justices, one of whom, Justice Kavanaugh, who's literally worked in the White House, about telling the government that it can't talk to speech disseminators, not just platforms, but newspapers, radio stations, other carriers of information, that what they are carrying, the speech that they are carrying, is harmful. So I think if I had to predict, in this case, this opinion will come out in the next month and a half or so, I suspect the Supreme Court is going to really pull back on this theory of jawboning and try to recognize that even though there is a speech issue here, the government has to be able to communicate with private parties that are carrying the speech of other parties. Again, that's what the bully pulpit is for. So just to wrap up, and to try to tie this case into the current theme and the reason for our getting together, I think there are things that we'll be able to learn from this case about how the press interacts with the government. First, you have the issue that we've all been dealing with around the world, right? What's the press, right? When we talk about the press, are we just talking about television stations, newspapers, or are we talking about bloggers? Are we talking about the solitary blogger? So anyone who basically engages in the dissemination of information, I think the case will give us some directions to look to in terms of defining to what degree online speech is like traditional media. As I said, I think the court is also going to give us some guidelines as to when the government can pressure people who carry the speech of other people, and when that will run afoul of the First Amendment. What are the kind of guidelines for the government to stay within? Because again, as we said, the government has speech rights too. And then again, what should the press actually do when it gets interactions with the government, when it hears from the government where the government is expressing the view that the government does not like what the speaker has said, either the press itself or someone that the press has talked to and the press is disseminating someone else's speech? How should the press respond going forward? So I think this case that's nominally about social media platforms and government interaction with social media platforms, I think it does have some real potential ramifications for press freedom as we move forward and kind of try to figure out what all of this means.
Nika, thank you very much for brilliant speech. Thank you very much for all the remarks. If I may ask you about the lessons from January 6, 2021. And the question is about social media. You mentioned about the platforms and yeah, but should we regulate the social media? And if yes, in which way? How we should? How is it possible? From perspective of a global platform, fortunately, majority of them there's American companies, but we must remember about, for example, TikTok. Yeah. So I mentioned that the majority of big platforms that are of United States company. It means that there is a tradition of freedom of expression, yeah, in United States. But once again, we have also very popular TikTok, yeah, with Chinese background, and we of course remember about the new regulation in United States, yeah, 2 weeks ago probably, yeah, it was. Yeah,
yeah, those are all great questions. I think it's going to be very challenging under our current constitutional regime to regulate content moderation of platforms, right? And that's actually relates to another case that's currently before the Supreme Court, where Texas and Florida, 2 states here in the States, basically passed laws that I think we would all call, even in the international context, must carry laws, right? Where Texas and Florida is basically trying to limit the discretion of Facebook and Twitter and the other platforms to decide what to carry. And I think those cases, those laws are not going to survive. And the reason for that is our current precedents here in the States are pretty firm with respect to whether or not moderating content is itself protected by the First Amendment. So what the platforms are saying is that in our moderation of content, our terms of service, we are no different than a newspaper or a television station, right? Those decisions about what to carry and what not to carry have expressive significance, and the government can't interfere with them. Now, is that the right answer as a democratic matter? As you say, do we want for the First Amendment to land in a place where the government basically can't do anything about planning of an insurrection, and we only have to rely on the platforms themselves to moderate that content? Even though that's probably the right constitutional answer, that's not maybe an ideal answer in terms of what's overall best for the democracy. The TikTok ban is very interesting. I think if I had to bet right now, I would say that the TikTok ban in the United States will go into effect. It will be signed by the president. It will be challenged under the First Amendment, and it will fail. Because the government here in the States is not doing a great job with respect to talking about why it wants to ban TikTok. You know, if you say that your reason for banning TikTok is national security based, then a court's going to defer to that, right? If you say that you want to ban TikTok because it's corrupting the minds of American youth, then the First Amendment's going to be on the battlefield, and it's going to be a very difficult thing to support on these bases. And it's just like in all of your countries, you know, these legislators each have their own reason for supporting this ban, and to the extent TikTok's going to be able to point to content-related reasons for the ban, I think it's going to be very difficult in court for the ban to survive.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much once again, Enrique. It was a great pleasure also meet with you, and I hope I will stay in touch. Once again, thank you very much. And we have also 2 distinguished speakers, Professor Stanisław Jędrzejewski in Warsaw. I hope Professor is still with us. Yes, Professor. I'm sorry for so long waiting for this your speech. Let me introduce very shortly Professor Stanisław Jędrzejewski, who is a professor at Kozminski University of Warsaw, but he was also head of Department of Theory, Communicational Practice of Radio at the John Paul II Catholic University in Lublin. But between 1989 and 1990, he was a vice chairman of the Commission of the Reform of Polish Radio and Television. Between 1990 and 1993, he was the program director of the Polish Radio, and then he was a board member of Polish Radio company. Between 1985 and 2007, he worked as a vice president and member of the European Broadcasting Union Radio Committee in Geneva. Professor Jędrzejewski is a member of the Digital Strategy Group second of the European Broadcasting Union in Geneva. In 2003, between 2003 and 2005, he was the director of Polish Radio, and in 2005, a member of National Broadcasting Council, Polish National Broadcasting Council. And in the years 2009 and 2011, after winning competition for the position, he worked at the Communication and Society Research Center of the University of Minho in Braga, Portugal. And I should add also that Professor was working on the new regulation of public media system in Poland, because maybe you know what's happened during the last 8 years, and I hope that Professor will present in his speech between darkness and light the main challenges for public media in Poland. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. I would like to tell you very briefly the transition from darkness to light as a metaphor for the transformation of public media in Poland. On the beginning, the background of the drama, it began in 2005-2007, when the populist right-wing party Law and Justice first won the parliamentary elections. It was just a light touch only. It won another victory in 2015, taking power much more strongly. The public media became its own caricature, the party media practicing propaganda and manipulation, developing hate speech against political opponents, and buying the favor of journalists on a big scale. And fortunately, the populists were beaten in last parliamentary election, October 2023, and we can rebuild or reconstruct the public media once again. The key issue is the relationship between the scale and cost of broadcasting and the potential for public funding. Additional concerns include maintaining independence from politics and the market, adapting to changing audience behavior, diversifying the portfolio of media services, and being accountable to audiences, and not just the power authorities or regulators. All these issues provoke calls for radical reform to secure the future of public broadcasting, or at least the provision of public media services. We will try to introduce a citizen media model developed between 2022 and 2024 by the voluntary group of experts. I am a member of this team, and the proposed Public Media Act aims to ensure editorial independence, adequate funding, and better use of new technologies and audience engagement. The scope covers all types of public media activities, including digital services. We will emphasize the continued role of the National Broadcasting Council as a media regulatory body with expanded function, including ombudsman. We propose the abolition of the National Media Council. This is the second and another regulatory body in media responsible for the appointment of public media heads, and regular monitoring and performance evaluation of, by the National Council is intended to ensure that the public interest is served. And next, we propose the merger of Telewizja Polska, TVP, Polish television, and Polskie Radio, Polish Radio, into regional media companies, and ultimately on nationwide scale. The focus on local and regional content is intended to increase their relevance and effectiveness. And the next, the establishment of the joint public media portal for television and radio aims to strengthen news services and migrate program offerings to the web, aiming to increase reach, especially among younger audiences, and integration of TVP and Polish radio archive collections, making them available to a wider audience. The new governance structure linked to the socialization of management includes board of trustees elected primarily from among representatives of community, organization, NGOs, and other organizations, and responsibilities include oversight of regional broadcasting companies and adherence to charters of responsibilities. The charter of remit, and programming and financial agreements. And the next and the last element is the funding model. Introduction of the audiovisual levy or fee, audiovisual fee, collected together with the personal tax, intended to be a stable and predictable source of funding, because the license fee in Poland is completely collapsed. Temporarily, the public media will be financed from the state budget through the 2 or 3 years. And on the ending of my speech, this strategic outline for the reconstruction of Polish public broadcasters emphasizes changes in management, financing, and operations necessary to adapt to contemporary challenges and audience needs. That's all. Thank you very much indeed, folks.
Thank you very much, Professor. I should add also that I was privileged and great honor to be a member of the team with Professor Jędrzejewski and Professor Kowalski. And in 2008, we prepared the draft of the new regulation. Professor, do you believe that the public media system, true and fair public media in Poland, is this project is still possible?
I believe that will be succeed. Yes. But of course, it is the half of joke and half of true. But I believe that the new act and new legislation will be enacted in the short future. I believe.
We will see. I still believe also, yeah. Okay, we'll see.
I'm pretty optimistic.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you once again for inviting me. Brilliant speech. Thank you very much. And last but not least, speaker is in Brazil, Professor Leonardo Vizu. So Professor is a professor of law in public law and constitutional law. He is a member and chair of Constitutional Law Committee of the Rio de Janeiro chapter of the Brazilian Bar Association, and he serves many other functions and positions. But I know that we are on the end of this speech, this meeting, this webinar. So I would like to give you voice, and so once again, thank you very much. It's a great honor hosting you during this webinar. And your topic is freedom regarding natural rights, human rights, and fundamental rights. Challenges to press freedom, to media freedom. Okay, Professor, the floor is yours. Once again, thank you for joining this session. Okay, I'm sorry, please switch on your microphone because we can hear you. Yes? Once again.
Excuse me, you can hear me? Hello, can you hear? Can you hear?
I don't know what's happened, but unfortunately we can hear you. I don't know, maybe you should, because I can see you on two screens. I don't know, maybe this is a problem. Okay, now it's better.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Thank you. I like to thank to Professor Alexander Pires for the nomination, and I like to thank you for the invitation to speak to such an august audience. But my English is very poor. My English is very bad. I will speak in Portuguese, and the Professor Ellen is to translation for me. Okay?
Okay. Okay.
Bom, well, eu gostaria de falar sobre a liberdade.
I'd like to speak about the freedom
em três aspectos.
in three different aspects.
A liberdade, da qual a liberdade de imprensa é derivada,
Freedom, personal freedom from which freedom of the press is derived,
ela pode ser analisada inicialmente como um direito natural.
this can be recognized as a natural right.
Como direito natural, ela é um direito que nasce com todo ser humano.
Since it's a natural right, it's something that is born with us. It's inborn.
Bom, sendo um direito natural, o Estado não pode alienar o indivíduo desse direito.
Since this is a natural right, the state cannot deprive an individual of this right to speak.
Todos nascemos livres, todos nascemos iguais e todos nascemos com a prerrogativa de buscar a nossa felicidade.
We're all born equal. We're all born with this freedom to search for and find our own happiness.
Bom, além de ser um direito natural, a liberdade também é um direito humano.
It's a human right. Besides being just a natural right, it's also human right.
Como direito humano, a liberdade ela é tratada em acordos internacionais.
And since it's a human right, it's dealt with by international agreements.
Nesses acordos internacionais, a liberdade ela é normatizada pelo direito internacional público.
Okay, you have the international public right to freedom of speech.
Bom, sendo assim, a liberdade ela é fruto de um consenso coletivo internacional.
So this is the fruit of an international consensus of opinion regarding human rights,
constando em diversos atos e acordos internacionais,
which is results in several different international accords and agreements.
Todavia, quanto direito constitucional, quanto direito fundamental, a liberdade ela é tratada de acordo com a Constituição de cada país.
But this right is treated in accordance with the Constitution of each country.
Esse que é o grande desafio que os teóricos têm hoje.
That's the challenge that the theorists are facing today.
Entender que a liberdade é tanto um direito natural, um direito humano e um direito fundamental.
So they have to understand and that it's a human right, an inborn right, natural right, and it's also, what was the last thing you said?
Direito fundamental.
It's a fundamental human right.
Como direito fundamental, ele é limitado culturalmente, geograficamente e historicamente.
So it's limited by geographic conditions, political conditions, and what's the last one?
Culturalmente.
Cultural.
Bom, por que estou falando isso?
Why am I saying this?
Porque, sendo a liberdade normatizada como direito fundamental, ela pode ser limitada de acordo com a Constituição de cada país.
So since it's limited by the Constitution of each country, this natural right.
Entendam.
Please understand.
Se estamos em um Estado democrático de direito,
if we're in a democratic rule of law, a state of rule of law,
a liberdade e a liberdade de imprensa,
the personal freedom and as well as the freedom of the press,
ela é plenamente garantida.
It's completely guaranteed.
Se você se sente prejudicado por uma matéria publicada na imprensa,
if you feel like you've been harmed by something that was published in the press,
você simplesmente entra com um pedido de direito de resposta.
So you enter in with a request for freedom of answering, rebuttal.
E o direito de resposta vai lhe ser garantido na mesma proporção da matéria publicada.
And then that right of rebuttal is given in the same proportion as the original article or the original accusation.
Porém, quando a democracia está sendo ferida,
when democracy is being harmed,
quando os estados estão tendentes a assumir alguns aspectos ditatoriais,
when the state begins to assume some aspects, dictatorial aspects,
começa-se com a censura prévia.
Then we start seeing previous censorship.
Yeah. Por que disso? Porque a grande preocupação de regimes ditatoriais não são com as mentiras, não é com o que a mídia publica.
Yeah, the big worry of the state or the government is not fake news, but it's concerned more about true news getting published.
E com o controle que eles fazem da propaganda, com o controle que eles fazem daquilo que é publicado.
The control they have over what is published, what is the narrative that is being given.
E vamos ter em mente uma coisa: notícia que não incomoda não é notícia, é propaganda.
News that doesn't upset you isn't news, it's propaganda.
E hoje nós temos um fenômeno de cooptação da mídia livre para que ela possa fazer a propaganda de determinados regimes oficiais.
So what we're seeing now is that the press is being co-opted so that it reflects the opinion of the government more than actual independent reporting.
Quando a ditadura está instalada,
when the dictatorship is established,
além de você ter a censura prévia,
besides having this previous censorship,
existe a perseguição, a violência aos jornalistas que têm a coragem de publicar a verdade.
So then you have persecution against journalists that dare to publish the truth.
O que muitos jornalistas não entendem,
what a lot of reporters and journalists don't understand,
quando vão fazer cobertura em estados estrangeiros,
when they go to cover news in foreign countries,
é que eles não estão ingressando em democracias livres.
They're not entering into a free democracy.
Eles estão ingressando em regimes ditatoriais.
They're going into dictatorial regimes.
Que vão tratar a liberdade como lixo.
They're going to treat freedom as garbage.
E vão exatamente usar de violência
and they'll use violence
para cercear a voz livre do jornalista.
To shut the free voice of journalism.
Então, o que nós temos hoje no mundo
What we have in the world today
é uma certa confusão nos conceitos teóricos sobre os diversos aspectos que a liberdade e a liberdade de imprensa possuem.
we have a confusion about what defines freedom of the press, freedom of speech.
Por quê? Conforme eu falei inicialmente,
Like I said at the beginning,
a liberdade ela pode ser analisada por esses três aspectos.
so we can analyze freedom by these three aspects.
Para o jurista, para o profissional do direito,
For a professional,
of law,
what was that?
of law,
Of law.
of law, of the rights.
Of law. Sorry. Well, we have in comparison with the rule of law.
Como eu estava falando, para o cientista social,
For a social scientist, for example,
a liberdade ela tem que ser vista como instituto,
individual freedom needs to be seen as an institution,
tanto da filosofia do direito,
not only from the philosophy of law,
aí ela vai ser tratada como um direito natural,
needs to be treated as an individual right
inerente a todo ser humano,
that all humans have,
mas quando o direito humano ela é tratada como um direito internacional público.
so where the individual freedom is treated as an international public freedom
Constante em acordos internacionais.
in accordance with international agreements.
Mas no ramo do direito constitucional,
But in the branch of constitutional law,
a liberdade ela é um direito fundamental.
the freedom of speech is a constitutional natural right.
Todavia, ela é interpretada de acordo com o regime político vigente de cada país.
But it's being interpreted according to the particular government that's in power.
Então, mesmo que você esteja em um país em que a Constituição garanta a liberdade e a liberdade de imprensa,
Even if you're in a country that guarantees personal freedom and freedom of the press,
se o regime político vigente
if the power that is in control, the political power,
for um regime simpatizante a regimes totalitários,
if they're sympathetic with totalitarian regimes,
eles vão dar uma interpretação à Constituição,
they're going to interpret the Constitution,
permitindo que a censura prévia seja feita,
allowing this previous censorship to be applied,
e que os profissionais de mídia, que os jornalistas
the journalists and news professionals,
sejam punidos por fazer o seu trabalho.
so they end up punishing journalists who are doing their job. They wind up punished for doing their job,
Por publicarem a verdade
for publishing the truth
em relação ao regime político vigente.
related to the rule, the power and control.
E isso é um fenômeno que está na atualidade em diversos países.
And this is a phenomenon that we're seeing in many countries.
Podemos observar tanto no continente americano
We can see it in North America, in the United States,
quanto na Europa,
Europe,
Ásia,
Asia,
Oceania,
in the Oceania,
os mesmos fenômenos de perseguição e censura à liberdade de imprensa.
the same persecution against freedom of the press.
E o que torna mais grave
And what makes it worse,
é que eles tentam cercear a liberdade
to try to control freedom
em nome de uma pseudo-democracia,
in the name of a false democracy,
que na verdade nada mais é
which is really none other than
do que um regime ditatorial que está tentando se instalar pelas vias institucionais.
it's nothing more than a dictatorship trying to come into power by the established institutions.
Bom, e para encerrar a minha fala,
Okay, to close here,
eu gostaria de trazer um pensamento atribuído a um escritor norte-americano, Mark Twain.
I wanted to bring in a quote from Mark Twain.
Excuse me,
There we go.
please.
Okay.
Assim encerro a minha fala com um pensamento atribuído ao escritor Mark Twain.
Thus, I close my speech with a thought attributed to the writer Mark Twain.
Numa república, quem é o país?
In a republic, who is the country?
É o governo do momento?
Is it the government of the moment?
Por quê? Afinal, o governo é apenas um funcionário temporário.
Because after all, the government is just a temporary employee.
Não pode ser sua prerrogativa que determina o que é certo ou o que é errado. Decidir quem é patriota ou não.
It cannot be your prerogative that determines what is right and what is wrong, deciding who is a patriot or not.
Sua função é seguir ordens, não dá-las.
Your job is to follow orders, not give them.
Quem então é o país?
Who then is the country?
São os jornais?
Is it the newspapers?
A igreja?
The church?
Afinal, estas são apenas partes do país, não o todo.
After all, these are just parts of the country, not the whole.
Eles não têm o comando, mas apenas uma parcela dele.
They have no command, but only a portion of it.
Em uma monarquia, o rei e sua família são o país.
In a monarchy, the king and his family are the country.
Em uma república, é a voz comum do povo.
In a republic, it is the common voice of the people.
Cada um de vocês, por si só, deve falar com responsabilidade.
Each of you, on your own, must speak responsibly.
Se nós queremos viver em uma república democrática,
if we want to live in a republic under the rule of law,
o direito à liberdade de expressão deve ser pleno.
It should be a full freedom of the speech.
O direito à liberdade de imprensa deve ser pleno.
Freedom of the press should be complete.
Se eu quero que meu cidadão exerça as suas próprias escolhas,
if I want a citizen to exercise his own choices,
tenha livre arbítrio para poder viver em sociedade,
and have the free choice to live in society,
eu tenho que garantir que ele tenha pleno acesso,
I have to guarantee that he has full access
ao que acontece nos bastidores do governo.
He needs to have full access to what is going on behind the scenes in the government,
para que ele possa tirar suas próprias conclusões.
So he can arrive at his own conclusions.
E dessa forma, a liberdade de imprensa,
because of this, freedom of the press,
é fundamental para que o Estado democrático de direito possa permanecer operando.
So freedom of the press has to be in place in order for the government to function properly.
Ok. O primeiro sinal que a democracia está sendo ferida,
the first sign that a democracy is being damaged,
é quando você tenta cercear o trabalho da imprensa,
when you try to control the work of journalists,
calando os jornalistas,
shutting the voice of the journalists,
muitas vezes em nome de uma falsa liberdade,
often in the name of a false freedom,
que nada mais é do que
which is nothing more than
censura.
Censorship.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your speech in beautiful Portuguese language. Thank you also to the translator for your help. And you quoted Mark Twain speech. I would like on the end quote to a very short epigram wrote by Polish, one of the most important romantic poets, Cyprian Kamil Norwid, who wrote in the middle of 19th century such epigram: their strength, violent commanders, armies fully trained, police male, female, uniformed and plain, thus united against whom a few thought that aren't new. This is a very pessimistic point of view, but unfortunately, thank you very much, all speakers, for different perspective, different experiences, different cases from different continents. It was amazing because we showed that the world is as a global village, and we can freely discuss about some important question about the freedom of media, freedom of expression, and I think that I'm sure that it's one of the most important human rights, and this is a reason why we organized this webinar, and we would like to celebrate this Freedom Day. We had different, once again, perspective, scientific, practical, etc. So it was, from my point of view, amazing. But maybe some of you have any comments or questions or suggestions of I don't know, who would like to join you also to discussion. Okay, yeah, we have one question. Yeah, oh no, Yuri Francino, would you like to ask a question? No, or yes? Yes, okay. So
you need
please
to turn on your micro.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Yeah, I'm afraid that we have a technical problem. Okay, yeah, I understand how the international.
I think he's writing on that.
Yeah, but I can read it now. Oscar, Yuri wrote a question in the chat gap. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Yuri, but this is not possible. But in case of, we must only count with defamation. So I'm sorry, I can see your post, but in a very short way. It means that this is even not possible to read all chat. Yeah. Okay, maybe next time. Once again, thank you very much to all speakers, and I hope that we will meet on the other webinars organized by RC26 of International Political Science Association. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Special thanks to Oscar, who gave us the platform to make the globe the global village. Thank you very much, Oscar, once again, for your help and your support. Thank you very much, Professor Jędrzejewski. Thank you very much. Okay, we can see some.
Welcome. Thank you to all.
Thank you very much. So, see you soon, I hope. I don't know, in virtual space or maybe on the conference. So I hope that we will meet very soon. Thank you very much once again for your impact to this conference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.